Tonight, it's Election Day all over again.
I'm going to protect Georgia.
You have a pastor in the Senate.
Voters in Georgia head to the polls in the Peach State's runoff election in the race for the Senate.
Plus, targeted attack. North Carolinians prepare for more cold nights in the dark after gunshots fired on the power grid.
And get more sleep as Americans face a triple-demic, the importance of getting plenty of Z's.
When people get the sleep they need, their health is much better off, both our mental health as well as our physical health.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Election Day deja vu in Georgia. Welcome to Faith Nation. From our studio in Washington, I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Voters will have their say in Georgia tonight. Just 1 hour until polls close there in the highly anticipated runoff Senate race.
Incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock is trying to hold off Republican challenger Herschel Walker in the high-stakes race. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has been tracking activity in the Peach State all day long. Matt, a long election cycle season almost over.
Yeah, almost, but not quite. Neither Warnock nor Walker got 50% of the vote a month ago in the general election, so they head into overtime. The stakes still very high. If Warnock keeps the seat, then Democrats have a 51-49 majority in the Senate. That one extra seat means they would have majorities on committees, making it easier to pass Democrat priorities out of those committees without having to convince a Republican to join them. The situation the exact opposite if Walker wins. A 50-50 Senate gives Republicans more opportunities to potentially block legislation, especially if any Democrats decide to go against their own party. Both Walker and Warnock were out making their final pushes today.
Right now, Georgia is looking for a senator that's going to speak for them. Raphael Warnock has not spoken for Georgia. Everyone knows that, and they never said anything about it. Right now, I'm going to speak for the Georgia people. The Georgia people are good people.
This is the 5th time my name's been on the ballot, so I am fully acquainted with tired. But let me tell you my definition of tired this morning. Having to be represented by Herschel Walker for 6 years. That, my friends, will be exhausting.
Now, there was a concern about the weather in Georgia today, with rain potentially impacting turnout. The rain came down this morning, but afternoon voters were in a little better shape to try and stay dry if they chose to vote in person.
Speaking of in-person voting, what more, Matt, can you tell us about early voting turnout?
Well, it was record-breaking. More than 1.8 million people voted early in Georgia for the runoff. That's significant because the race was no longer a deciding factor for the Senate, but obviously still very important to the people of Georgia. And part of the race has been defined by character issues, with Senator Warnock repeatedly calling into question Herschel Walker's character and scandals, and Walker trying to do the same to Warnock.
We're talking about right now, Georgia voters voting. Right now, I put my character against Raphael Warnock any day. Right now, I've done a lot of things, but we have to go because I want to get people out to vote.
My opponent says many things. You can't believe any of it.
So a little bit of an icy ending here. Warnock held an edge of 39,000 votes over Walker in the general election just a month ago. Another thin margin is expected for the runoff as Georgia polls close this evening. But because there's only one race, it's possible we could know a winner tonight. Guys?
All right, Matt Galka, thank you very much. And here with us now, Justin Giboney with the AND campaign. Justin, welcome. Always good to have you. You, of course, are in Georgia. It's been a cold, rainy day there. What's your sense? Is this going to affect turnout?
I think it'd have a small effect, but I think the race is pretty much decided. I fully expect Warnock to handily beat Walker tonight.
So as we were just mentioning, nearly 2 million Georgians set a record with early voting. That tops early votes cast in the general election a month ago. Still, when you compare it to early voting in the Georgia runoffs 2 years ago, that number is down. So what's your sense, Justin, of where things stand with the race now, and why do you anticipate or expect that number is down?
Yeah, I mean, that was a presidential. So, you don't necessarily expect midterms to be up with the presidential. And as I said before, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the momentum here in Georgia, it looks like Warnock's going to win handily tonight.
There's a lot of people saying, are you over-interpreting perhaps the early vote? What's your response to that? Because early vote traditionally favors the Democrats.
Early vote is one way to look at it, but I think Walker's campaign just lost a lot of momentum. So you can see that in fundraising. You can see that in the size of the crowds that he was drawing during the runoff. It just wasn't comparable to what Warnock was doing. So there are other signs other than early voting that tell us this might not be as close as we might have expected it to be.
From a Christian perspective, Justin, why is this such a critical race?
Well, I think Christians should care about what's going on. If we care about our neighbors, we have to care who our representatives are. And so we should be engaged in these races. There's Christians, I'm sure, that voted on both sides. But it's important for us to weigh in, because these are very serious issues that one of these two men is going to be dealing with for 6 years.
As we wrap up the 2022 election cycle, I apologize to move forward, but former President Trump has already announced his 2024 White House run. President Biden's expected to announce his re-election bid after the holidays. Justin, does the political divide in Georgia reflect the rest of America? And if so, what does that mean for 2024?
Georgia certainly has some divides, but I think if you look at what happened in the general election here, I don't think Trump has the same hold on the Republican Party in Georgia as he might in other places. So if you look at our Governor Kemp, who had a very public spat with the president, many Republicans here in Georgia aren't just going to vote for who they think Trump would want them to, and voted Trump down. I mean, I think the biggest thing is 2 years ago, Georgia was the place where Trump was defeated and pretty much lost the presidency.
All right, Justin Giboney with the AND campaign. It's always great to see you, and we appreciate you joining us on a big day down there in Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Well, North Carolina in the dark. The hunt is on as investigators try to find out who's behind an attack on critical infrastructure there.
Yeah, tens of thousands of people are still without power after 2 energy substations were riddled with bullets Saturday. CBN News correspondent Brody Carter is following this story. Brody, a terrorism bulletin suggests there's a strong connection between attacks on power infrastructure and violent extremists.
John, Jenna, in January, the DHS warned violent extremists had plans to attack the U.S. electric grid. They renewed that bulletin in November. However, with no suspect or motive, investigators say anything's possible.
Got no way to heat because we don't have a fireplace, and then we don't have no gas grill or anything like that.
It's been 3 days since police say 2 Duke Energy substations were targeted and vandalized with gunfire in Moore County, North Carolina.
I will say this, the individual that done the damage knew exactly what they were doing.
And with no power, life has become difficult for the locals.
We used all of our sanitation gel and everything today. Being without water is worse than, not having lights or anything.
Crews are making the costly repairs to restore power. Still, some 30,000 people woke up in the dark Tuesday.
We will gradually see more recovery, but we could still see this extend Wednesday into Thursday, somewhere in that time frame.
With no suspect or motive, the FBI, DHS, and ATF have stepped in to investigate this crime with local law enforcement. Moore County is under a state of emergency with countywide curfews to protect people and businesses.
We understand that it is December, the nights get cold, and being without power is very challenging at times.
The attack has raised awareness about the vulnerabilities of the nation's power grid to domestic attacks.
Protecting critical infrastructure like our power system must be a top priority. This kind of attack raises a new level of threat.
We're still waiting for the investigation to figure out who's responsible, but it does cause some concern that maybe we have some violent extremist actors at play here.
Charges could range from conspiracy to murder if someone dies from the cold in this outage. Now, the mayor says those responsible committed a selfish and cruel act that has hurt thousands. John, Jenna, back to you.
All right, Brody Carter, thank you so much. Well, here now, Scott White, Associate Professor and Director of the Cybersecurity Program at the George Washington University. Dr. White, thank you so much for joining us. The threat to America's power grid has been a topic of concern for national security officials for some time. What makes America's electricity infrastructure so difficult to defend? And a little bit of a follow-up here, is it that much different than the infrastructure of other countries? Are they also as susceptible?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It's a great question. One of the biggest problems we have in the grid is that it's so diffused. I mean, there are miles and miles of tracks of towers that are sitting out there on very unpopulated areas. So the grid itself is really difficult to protect. Substations, power generation plants can be, because they're one large physical object, they can generally be fenced off, cameraed, and protected. But when you start moving across the grid, across the country, then you have that problem of these towers and substations left undefended.
Yeah. You know, I was reading someone with the right rifle, the right skill could knock out a power grid like from, nearly 5,000 feet away. Scott, how do you defend against that?
Yeah, another excellent question. It's very difficult to do it. I think what's interesting about this, though, is when you kind of look, this is a very low-tech type of attack. I mean, it was a rifle. This wasn't an explosive device or a drone attack. This was a rifle. So this is a rather low-tech. And the concerning thing is, such a low-tech attack can put 45,000 people without power. A national attack against the entire infrastructure would be very difficult. You know, the national grid's broken up into three sectors, really. The Midwest and West, East, and, of course, Texas. And, of course, those also go into Canada, which are also part of the grid process. It would be very difficult to take out the entire grid, although it has happened. It happened about 20 years ago. There was a power generation problem. But it's very difficult to take out the entire grid. But it's these small substations and these tower assemblies, pylons, that exist in the middle of nowhere. They're very susceptible.
As an expert in cybersecurity, you talk about the difficulty to defend against attack. What can be done? What are the recommendations or suggestions you have that can help protect our infrastructure?
Well, I think you look at it from a variety of perspectives. There's actually the physical infrastructure itself, which, as I said, because it's so diffused, it's difficult to protect. But the power generation plants themselves, some of the larger substations, and of course the infrastructure, the computer infrastructure that drives this system, can be reinforced. I think what we can do in those other areas, like we're seeing in North Carolina, is try to build in as much resiliency as we can to all types of attack vectors, but also have a really good response. And I think we're seeing that in North Carolina, that it's probably going to be by Thursday at the latest, everyone will be up and running again, maybe earlier. So I think part of our strategy is we have to be able to respond quickly, repair the damage, and get the system up and running again.
You know, in this case of North Carolina, does it seem to be the work of a lone wolf, a terror cell, or could it have just been someone who was taking shots at a power station?
Yeah, I think, after 9/11, we can't take anything for granted anymore, and we have to view everything outside of the box. But from my perspective, this appears, because it's a low-tech attack, this individual had to have been there quite some time to engage in the amount of gunshots. Generally, someone who's going to do an attack wants to hit and get away very quickly, to fight another day. This person put themselves in a bit of jeopardy in that they were obviously on scene for a while, discharging a firearm. It made them more susceptible to being caught. So to me, this is kind of a disorganized offender here. It could be anybody from a disgruntled employee, a disgruntled customer, or, like you said, it could be someone from an organized terrorist group. We don't know.
All right. Scott, we are unfortunately out of time. Scott White with the George Washington University. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Well, the Pentagon says China is the #1 threat to the U.S. Coming up, why that may be overhyped. And welcome back. A new Pentagon report is shedding light on a military buildup in a country considered to be the greatest national security threat to the United States. China has long worked to outpace the U.S. economically, and now its sights are set on militarily.
That's right. Experts warn if America doesn't act now and the communist regime becomes the leading world power, it could result in the end of security, freedom, and global prosperity. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more.
The Chinese Communist Party is conducting the largest military modernization effort in the country's history, a move the Pentagon believes is not only in preparation for taking Taiwan, but also for overtaking the United States as the world's leading superpower.
I see the United States as the world's leading democratic power, and China is the world's leading authoritarian power. So if we don't realize that we're in a competition, we're going to lose that competition, and our core national security, economic interests will be at stake.
The newly released DoD report on China's military strength includes some significant findings. In 2021, Beijing tested 135 ballistic missiles, more than the rest of the world combined. Their nuclear stockpile sits at around 400 warheads, but is expected to grow to about 1,500 by 2035. The PRC is stealing technology from the United States and sending it directly to its military. They have strategic partnerships with Iran and Russia, and they're looking to build new military bases around the world.
Beijing is sprinting to build the capability to carry out their words. They're matching actions with words. That's, to me, the bottom line.
Bradley Bowman, the senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at Freedom for Defense of Democracies, says China is clearly preparing to take Taiwan, even if it means a direct military conflict with the U.S. He believes how we respond could determine whether or not China displaces America in the power competition.
If you don't like what you're seeing in Xinjiang with what I would call crimes against humanity and some have called genocide, if you don't like what you've seen in Hong Kong with the extinguishment of freedom there, if you don't like what you see with the bullying in the South China Sea, and if you don't like the saber rattling in the Taiwan Strait, if America stands down and becomes insular and stares at our belly button and thinks we can get away with ignoring the world, we're going to see a heck of a lot more of that globally.
Some believe Beijing's military buildup is simply to match the economic power they've become. But Bowman argues without transparent strategic dialogue with the U.S., the Pentagon is right to sound the alarm.
And when we don't have that transparency and we don't know exactly what's going on, it forces the Pentagon to assume the worst. And when both sides are assuming the worst about the other, it leads to dangerous miscalculation.
Bowman says the U.S. has what it takes to deter Chinese aggression, but there needs to be more of a sense of urgency coming from Washington. He says that would involve immediate funding to ramp up our own military modernization efforts and to start acquiring the weapons needed to defend democracy worldwide. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Caitlin. Colds, coughs, and COVID. Why the key to staying healthy might be as simple as a good night's sleep. We explain when Faith Nation returns.
A triple-demic of COVID, flu, and respiratory illness is on the rise. And one way to fight it, getting plenty of sleep.
Research shows people who don't get enough sleep are 4 times as likely to catch a cold than people who do. Here's medical reporter Lori Johnson with some tips on how to get a good night's rest.
Scientific evidence shows that how much we sleep directly relates to our immune system function. Getting plenty of Z's helps repair just about every system within our bodies.
When people get the sleep they need, they're more productive, they're more creative, they are better partners, they're better parents, they're more empathetic, and their health is much better off, both our mental health as well as our physical health.
Most adults need about 8 hours a night to feel refreshed and ready for the next day.
And on the shorter end, like when we get less than 5 hours, that is certainly kind of a risk factor for lots of negative health outcomes.
Anxiety often creates a barrier to sleep. People who struggle with this should consider preparing for bedtime a full 2 hours before lights out. That means moving from work, news, and electronics to something more calming, familiar, and pleasant.
Oftentimes people treat themselves like they're computers, that you can just kind of flip the off switch and then kind of go to sleep. And that's just not how the body works.
Setting your alarm clock so that you wake up at the same time every day, even on the weekends, is a useful tip to help gain control over when our body naturally gets sleepy, also known as circadian rhythm.
One of the things that happens with insomnia is that people try to kind of adjust their wake time based on how their night was, right? So like they have a bad night of sleep and they'll sleep in an extra 2 hours. But what that does is it kind of throws the whole system off. It actually kind of puts you in jet lag without having any of the benefits of traveling.
If you often toss and turn in the middle of the night, try getting up and moving to a different location like the couch. That can help your brain not associate anxiety with your bed, something called conditioned arousal.
So, you have your angstiness and your bed, and you need to break those apart and wait until you get sleepy again. So you don't want to turn on all the lights. You don't want to do anything really active. You want to go back to those relaxing things that are known to kind of bring on that sleepiness for you. And when you begin to feel sleepy again, you kind of repair that relationship so that, over time, when you get back in bed, the bed does what it's supposed to do, is cue you to fall asleep.
Exercise during the day tends to help us sleep well. So does a dark room that's a cool 65 degrees. On the other hand, things that can get in the way include caffeine and alcohol, which can suppress important dreaming or REM sleep.
The other thing that alcohol does is it's relaxing, right? It hits on those receptors in our brain that make us feel relaxed, but it wears off. And when it wears off, your brain notices, and that also leads to more awakening.
Also, try to avoid sleep medications and other aids.
Even if many of them are not physiologically addicting, they become almost immediately psychologically addicting, right? We start to wonder, can we sleep without these? And so it's a slippery slope to go down.
And that was Lori Johnson reporting. Thank you, Lori. Still ahead, Heroes in Blue receive Congress's highest honor. And finally tonight, nearly 2 years ago on January 6th, Capitol police officers answered the call of duty, defending our nation's capital from rioters. Today, those officers were honored in the Capitol Rotunda.
Top leaders from the United States House and Senate presented law enforcement with Congressional Gold Medals, Congress's highest honor.
These brave men and women are heroes. Heroes who protected so many from harm on that day. Heroes who live out the code to protect and serve.
The medals will be placed in 4 locations, including Capitol Police Headquarters, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, the Smithsonian Institution, and in the Capitol Complex itself. Congratulations to those men and women.
Yeah, nice to see them recognized.
Absolutely.
All right, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
We hope to see you right back here tomorrow.